Hey everybody. So today I'm going to focus on one thing in particular, and it has to do with EQing into compression in the mastering process. And we've got a really great track today to work on by the Samson brothers. The song is called Perfect View. They're a band out of South Africa, and they've been kind enough to allow us to use their music for education and demonstration. And we're just going to walk through what goes on in the mind of a mastering engineer to take this recording to where it needs to end up in its best realized place. So the first thing to do is just to listen to this mix flat, to absorb it, to understand what we're dealing with, and then I'll express what goes through my mind as I'm making these decisions. So here we go. This is the flat mix, no processing at all, just as it was sent to us digitally at 4424.
And I could tell this face is molding in my thoughts. I knew I needed you, girl, so then I was taking you home. Lucky like we in the stars, we looking up above. I see an angel in the dream that I want. Yeah, you were for my heart and my charm. Never be alone, girl, I had you from the start. You and me, we gon' be like this forever, and I'm you. Baby, you are me. We align, I'm just saying. Everything about you is my vision, and this is truth. Baby, you're a perfect view. Yeah, perfect view.
So this is a really nice sounding recording. The first thing that comes to mind is the space around the elements. It's a very open sounding recording, meaning that there's not a lot of dense bus compression that's really tightening these drums in the mix. You can even see just in the waveform how dynamic and open and punchy these drums are. You know, it's not squared off. These are just naturally dynamic, and it's kind of ripe for mastering. Another thing that I noticed is that the vocal it's almost like a whisper type vocal. It's an intimate vocal that's compressed. You know, he's not belting. He's kind of singing in his softer voice, but it's compressed. So it takes a lot of space up, and it's right there, always right in the forefront, but not really balanced, not entirely balanced that way in the mix. In other words, my ear's going to the heavy part of that kick. That's where my ear's going. So in mastering, what I want to do is create an end result where my ear is going right to that vocal, and everything below it is just holding up that vocal, nicely supported, but not taking my attention away from the vocal and onto the kick, which is happening when listening to the flat mix. So there's a couple ways to approach this. One way, which might be the most logical way, is what I won't do. In which case, you might think it might be best to just really focus in on what's wrong with this. In other words, there's a really heavy kick with a lot of weight and a lot of bottom on it. So wouldn't it make sense to start EQing that away? It could, but there might be a better way to do this. In other words, to take full advantage of all of that big body and that weight that the drums are supporting and the bass together are building up to create this nice support, why don't we open up the vocal on top of that? And shape that bottom so it's nice and can create that nice support. But then the vocal is nicely placed on top of that, and it all feels nice and balanced, and everything on top of the vocal in terms of anything that's on top of it in the frequency spectrum is a nice shape to it that's not taking your attention away from it also on top. So your ear goes directly to that vocal, and everything in the arrangement just creates a nice support to where your ear naturally wants to go. And maybe EQ into some compression. So as all of those drums are nicely supported, they also have a little bit of extra movement. So you kind of want to rock and kind of groove to the track a little bit, and you hear into it, and take best advantage of the fact that you have a very open, somewhat kind of gentle, sparse arrangement that can have the potential to have some movement and some ebb and flow with compression as those drums hit that compressor. So the first thing I'm going to do is demonstrate what happens when I push level into the compression without any EQ, doing any shape work. I'm going to start with a flat curve, and I'm just going to push level into the compression and then back it off. And you're going to hear, as I push into the compression, the elements in the mix losing the space that they have that's in the mix, because I'm pushing it a little too far, and then I'm going to back it off, and you're going to hear that space come back. I'm going to back it off a little too far, and it's going to feel like there's a lot of space, but it's not really controlled. And then I'm going to kind of go between those two places so you can really, really get a sense of what's happening there.
Oxytocin dream, you baby, you crowning me. You and me, we gon' be like this forever, and I'm you. Baby, you are me. We align, I'm just saying. Everything about you is my vision, and this is truth. Baby, you're a perfect view. Let the rain come down on me and wash you.
So immediately as I push into the compression, I'm hearing everything get a little tighter and a little harder, but it's also bringing that bottom up, and it's really making apparent how much bottom is in that mix. That's taking my attention away from the vocal and onto that place of where the bottom is living, which tells me that as I push up into the compression, I want to EQ open, maybe 3K, 6K, maybe a little bit around 10K, and then from there also kind of balance 60 and 120 in terms of how that bass is shaped. Not just bass, but the kick, the bass together that creates that support. And I'm going to shift all of this global frequency balance to find a preferred balance. And understand that as I open up 3K and 6K, it's another way of cutting bottom, because whenever you emphasize or de-emphasize any part of the frequency spectrum, everything is also shifted along the way of that. So as I boost 3K, I'm essentially taking away 60. And as I boost 6K, I'm essentially taking away 120. So all of these things are interrelated. So let me now EQ this, and I'll do some A-Bing to show you what this EQ is doing.
Oxytocin dream, you baby, you crowning me. You and me, we gon' be like this forever, and I'm you. Baby, you are me. We align, I'm just saying. Everything about you is my vision, and this is truth. Baby, you're a perfect view. Let the rain come down on me and wash away our pain. Baby, let the rain come down on me.
So already I'm getting pretty happy very quickly. And as I'm EQing, I'm fine-tuning that gain into the board, you know, in terms of how much gain is hitting the EQ, and then from that EQ'd shape into the compression. Understanding how that compression is enveloping the signal, but pushing up against that compression and that dynamic processing, which is many steps of compression. I could spend a whole other video talking about all of that, but in order to keep this kind of simple, I'm just talking about how I'm shaping the audio and how it's fitting the shape of the dynamic processing post-EQ, and having these two things theoretically work in a musical way that just feels really nice musically. So now that I'm here, I'm going to bypass just the EQ to show you guys what type of shape is fitting that shape of dynamic processing post the EQ. So starting in bypass with just the EQ, everything else is active.
Somebody like me, oxytocin dream. You baby, you crowning me. You and me, we gon' be like this forever, and I'm you. Baby, you are me. We align, I'm just saying. Everything about you is my vision, and this is truth. Baby, you're a perfect.
So this is feeling really good as a starting point. Now this is not our ending point. It's not just a set and forget situation here. There's different passages that this song needs to go through, in which case we might be making rides on the fly. In fact, I know we will be. I'm going to be reacting with my hands based off what happens from section to section. As things start changing in terms of their arrangement, I might be adjusting to that tastefully from section to section. And you'll see me do that at the end. I'm going to be riding this stuff through as we go. So now that I've showed you just bypassing this global shape maker EQ into the compression, I'm going to do a big before and after, meaning completely before. Flat mix versus where we are on the console currently, so you can get a good sense of how everything's working together in conjunction. So here's flat.
Somebody like me, oxytocin dream. You baby, you crowning me. You and me, we gon' be like this forever, and I'm you. Baby, you are me. We align, I'm just saying. Everything about you is my vision, and this is truth. Baby, you're a perfect
So now, just through experience, I'm going to listen to this first section. You'll notice that there's a few sections here that to pay attention to. You got your intro right here, and then all of the elements within the arrangement start coming in right here. And then from there, it dies down a little bit again, and then it picks back up from here. So I'm going to be aware of these sections, these smaller sections, versus everything else. And I'm gonna listen to how, when the arrangement falls away a little bit and then comes back, what happens globally balance-wise. And I suspect that this will feel a little bit more full and have more body into the compression, and these sections that don't have as much bass, it's going to create a situation where the compressors naturally release, and the overall signal is going to be a little bit more open. And then for these sections, it's going to darken relatively because it's going to fill in. So I'm going to compensate for that with EQ. In other words, at the beginning here, I'm going to ride back the openness at 3 and 6. Darken it relative. Not that I'm darkening it, I'm just not brightening it as much. So that then, as these sections build up, I can then work up against the compression and bloom it forward, and then come back and then bloom it back again. So now that I have my happy place for these sections, and I know where that is, in my ear remembers it, and also I know where it is with my hands and my eyes, I'm going to quickly, without losing my place, I'm going to listen to where I react just by listening to this section.
On the first night, heaven knows, I knew I needed you by my side, and I could tell this face is molding in my thoughts. I knew I needed you.
And this should happen very quickly. It's an immediate reaction to what I just heard, and it made me want to darken 3 and 6 a little bit, and now I'm ready to print. And you're going to see what happens. And I'm going to do this very quickly because I don't want to lose the whole feel of this. You have musical momentum as you're mastering. You want to stay on that train. So we're going to go for it, and then I'm going to ride this in real time open when we get to this section right here, and then back down a little bit for here, and then back open from here, and then more around the same zone for the remainder of the song, but I'm going to have my hands on the console ready to adjust if need be for whatever I react to that comes along in the song. So here we are, ready to record, everything's set, and here we go.
Let the rain come down on me. Feeling love, making love on the first night. Heaven knows, I knew I needed you by my side, and I could tell this face is molding in my thoughts. I knew I needed you, girl, so then I was taking you home. Lucky like we in the stars, we looking up above. I see an angel in a dream that I want. Yeah, you were for my heart and my charm. Never be alone, girl, I had you from the start. You and me, we gon' be like this forever, and I'm you. Baby, you are me, we align, I'm just saying. Everything about you is my vision, and this is truth. You're a perfect view, yeah, perfect view, perfect eyes. All she knew, I was falling like I was hypnotized. Same for her, I told her my dreams and what could be a perfect life. Next to me, king and queen, yeah, she couldn't deny. I knew you were my queen. You said you would never met somebody like me. Oxytocin dream, you baby, you crowning me. You and me, we gon' be like this forever, and I'm you. Baby, you are me, we align, I'm just saying. Everything about you is my vision, and this is truth. Baby, you're a perfect view. Let the rain come down on me and wash away our pain. Baby, let the rain come down on me and wash away our pain. Oxytocin dream. You and me, we gon' be
That's great. I feel really good about it. I'm connected to the song the entire way through. If anything shifts the balance as it's happening in real time, I'm compensating for that as it happens. I'm sensitive to it, I'm aware of it, and I'm following the recording the entire way through. And not once through that whole transfer do I feel like there's any slivers of disconnect from me fully experiencing that recording. And once I'm there, I'm done. I'm ready to print. And I'm ready to ship that because that feels really good to me and I wouldn't have it any other way. If a client has a note and they want something a little bit differently, I can certainly achieve that and probably get just as happy, but this feels really nice to me. It's deemed as ready to go. So there's a whole lot more to explain in terms of what's going on in the signal path and what's happening in the mastering chain, but to keep it simple for this video, I really just want to focus on what's happening between EQing into compression, what's going on in my mind as I'm interacting these two processes in sonic space, and all the things to key in on. So I hope this was informative, and we'll do plenty more with much more material.